So, guys, I am here with Jeff Hayes, Sleepaway Camp. In fact, Sleepaway Camp, making the movie and reigniting the campfire. This wonderful book here. Jeff, I really wanted to interview you because of how much work you've done in sort of coordinating the fandom of this film. The work that you've done in putting together such a wonderful book, so detailed, and we'll get into that. But just thank you so much for joining us because it is an absolute pleasure to speak to you.
Oh, no, thank you for having me.
No, that's great. Well, I have a feeling we'll have a lot in common just because from the moment I first saw Sleepaway Camp, and I think I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't what I saw. And I think that's a lot of people's reaction is, oh, this is a special film. But obviously, the film and the fandom's been on a long journey as well, hasn't it? Like people are very, very keen to talk about how much they love the film now. But I imagine when you started and when you obviously you watched it at a young age, but when you started telling people about your love for this film, did you feel a little bit isolated? Like you weren't sure whether there were many people who were into it too?
Oh, yeah. I mean, because when I first saw it, I was 11 years old, and it was on HBO one night. And, I would go into school then after the weekend, and I would be like, oh, my God, I just saw this wacky, crazy, awesome movie. Did any of you guys watch this movie, Sleepaway Camp? And everybody's like, what are you talking about? So then, of course, I had to take the tape and bring it into school and let everybody watch it. But,
oh, wow.
But yeah, I mean, at that time, it was hard to find anybody else who had seen it. And so, yeah, I mean, after creating the website, it was like now we had a place where like fans from all over the world could come to, to celebrate the movie and talk about it with other people who felt that same way, that like I'm the only person in the world who knows about this movie.
Yeah, in some ways that feels quite good. It's a bit like being into a band before they become really super popular.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a kind of a sort of pride, I suppose, of knowing I was there on the ground floor. But then what you've done, I think, which is different to what people who are like almost like gatekeeperish about the way that they love something, you really have opened up. First obviously through the website. You just wanted to get. Was it just a case of wanting to get everybody or as many people as possible into this film, and like you knew that once they saw it they would have a really strong reaction to it one way or the other?
Yeah, I think part of it was definitely wanting to spread the word out to people, because you had movies like Friday the 13th, and these were like almost mainstream. They're mainstream horror movies that everybody'd seen, and a lot of people loved them and enjoyed them. And we kind of felt like Sleepaway Camp is this movie that if you guys saw it, you would love it just like that. And because it wasn't really a mainstream thing, it didn't ever have that kind of acclaim that something like Friday the 13th had. So yeah, at the very beginning, we definitely wanted to push it and get it out there, just get people to see it. And and it turns out that a lot of people over time had seen it.
Yes.
But it was still kind of like an obscure movie. And, really until we put it on the website and, people started connecting from all over the world and saying, oh, yeah, I love this movie.
So when you were doing the website initially and connecting with all these people, you were putting lots of content up there. That was really instrumental in where you are now with the book, I imagine. Like, in a way, it's all the groundwork, it's all the relationships to get this made. That's what I got from the book, was that it's not just about I really like this film, it's that I'm like an active fan of this film. Like, you actively grown relationships through writing the book and through making the website, to the point where you're part of the crew, and you're adding those story elements to the later film. You people who are creatives in the industry. So were you always a creative person? Were you always somebody who, through your love of horror, wanted to to go beyond just consuming it. You wanted to be in it.
Oh yeah, I mean, since I was a kid, one of the things that I loved so much about horror movies was that I felt that they were like so creative. You know, you'd see all these creative murder sequences, and it would spark something creative inside, and you know, it would make me want to do it myself. So I had like a VHS camcorder, and what I would do is I'd get all the kids from around the neighborhood, and I would create all these like little 5-7 minute slasher movies, and like we'd go out into the local cemetery or wherever there was a neat location, and we would make these funny little movies, and like I do all my own gore effects, and you know, I didn't even write scripts. It was basically like, okay, you do this now, and you do this, and
very found footage almost.
Yeah. But yeah, so there was there was something creative inside me that, you know, definitely wanted to work with that sort of stuff. Not really as an actor. I was more into like the writing and directing element of it. But, you know, I always had friends from around the neighborhood who were always like, oh yeah, I'll be in it. I'll do it. You know, and it would get passed around at school and everybody would see it. And so they'd be like little stars of the neighborhood for a little while.
That's it. That's the thing. There's a real buzz from that. I used to write a lot when I was a kid, and I still write a little bit now. But I used to like write my own little books and slide them into the class library. And when I saw a kid pick up the book about my dog or whatever I'd written, you know, they were like, you get this real amazing buzz from seeing somebody consume something or enjoy something you've made. And yep. I think what's really exciting about your journey through this is obviously it's all documented in the book, and I don't want to I want people to go out and buy this book because I love the way it flows and explains your fandom from being 11 years old all the way through to now. But it's so much more than that because it's the life of the film. And I was trying to think about what it is about this particular film because I love this film. It's one of my favorite films. And it really sideswiped me when I first saw it. And I was thinking, well, what is it? And so for me, it was like kids swearing who look like real kids, creative kills. The look of it felt like something real. Like it didn't look glamorous. It looked like just gritty, but not sleazy. It just looked real. And the story was engaging. There was so much about it. What do you think it is that means that so many people, like I'm here in the UK and you're there in the US, and why we've come to this movie as like such a special movie? Because there's thousands and thousands to choose from.
Yeah, I mean, did you first see it when you were a kid?
I saw it in my 20s, so it's
really?
A little bit of a different experience. Yeah. I do remember seeing the VHS standees for the sequels.
I think part of it, as being a kid seeing it, was the relatability, because it really felt like a movie that was almost made for you know, kids 11, 12, 13 years old. Almost like, you know, the person who wrote it put themselves back into that 11, 12-year-old mind frame and came up with some things that, you know, that are part of a kid's world. And like, because I was so close in age to the main characters like Ricky and Angela, you know, I think there was a real relatability there. And then, you know, you're dealing with things that you deal with at school. You know, you got bully kids who are picking on other kids, and you know, you got other kids who are like friendly and they want to be helpful to everybody. And so it's like all these characters were almost like people you knew in your real life. And so, there was this real relatability, I think, because of all that. And I think, you know, that really, I think, drew in a lot of people. I know it, you know, it definitely did with me.
Yeah, because Ricky is an interesting character because he's so small and scrappy, and he's not your like heroic lead character, but he's got so much of like fight in him. He's just like fuck you and fuck off, and like I find him hilarious, but also really engaging as well because he's so protective of his cousin, but he's just I don't know. There's not many characters like that because ultimately, in a lot of these films that we see, a lot of the slasher films, we're talking people who are like playing 10 years younger than their actual age. So there's there is that distance, isn't there, between it?
Absolutely. I mean, and especially slasher movies that were coming out at that time period, there were always 20 somethings playing teenagers. So it was very rare to have teenagers playing teenagers. And again, I think that just, added to the relatability of the movie.
Yeah, they real kids acting like real kids.
Yeah.
And like, obviously, to then identify with them so strongly, to meet a lot of these people. Obviously, they're not the characters, but they're the actors who played the characters. Do you think building those relationships with them maybe changed the way you viewed the film, like revisiting it as you got older through hearing different things about how it got made and appreciating the difficulties and the challenges? Because obviously there's probably not much about the making of that film that you don't know now. Like, you've probably dug every element into every element.
Yeah, I mean, with the book, I really wanted one of the people who I really wanted to talk to, who had never really come out and done an interview, was Michelle Totosian. And she's director Robert Hiltzick's wife. At the time, they were boyfriend, girlfriend, but she was a producer on the movie. And, I've talked to Robert so many times over the years, and I've talked to Missy, but she never really, came out and, did an interview. So I was like, let's get some stuff from Missy's point of view that we can share with all the fans, because I'm sure she's got a lot of various things that she did on the movie that people would love to hear about. So so when I started with the book, she was one of the first people who I reached out to, and I was like, I know you don't want to do an on camera interview, but I'm doing a book, and I would love for you to talk about the movie, and let's get some quotes about what it was like for you. And she was very helpful. We went back and forth. She gave me tons of answers, and so I was able to share the movie now, not from just Robert's point of view, but also from Missy's point of view, as well as other people who I tracked down who nobody had heard talk about Sleepaway Camp before.
That's interesting you mentioned that, because as you were saying that, I was thinking it almost mirrors as I'm reading the book, and your wife had such an instrumental role in everything that you did, not just in terms of being supportive of one of your passions, but being just as active and getting things done and being part of the process. Did that kind of influence you wanting to make sure that you got Missy's point of view as well, knowing that you were kind of having the same, you've got the same relationships in a way with somebody who is putting as much into the project as you are?
That's a very interesting point. I don't know that I was really thinking of that, but I mean, that's definitely an interesting point. I definitely wanted to get Missy's point of view out there, because she had so much to do with the movie, from the casting, to every day on set dealing with a different issue. And so yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool how both Robert and I have wives in our lives that are very supportive and also very passionate about the stuff that we do.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it always takes me back. Always makes me think of Deborah Hill,
and John Carpenter, right?
Yeah, but because without her, I don't think it hits the same way. I don't think it feels the same way. I don't think the female characters have the same voice. There's so much of that.
Yeah, maybe exactly. Yeah, I think what you were saying is exactly right. She wrote a lot of the female characters, and you really, again, that's another movie where you kind of related to the female characters really well, because the person who wrote them was, almost, she just came from that bracket herself,
Yeah. So did you expect to kind of build such a close relationship with, obviously the website and the book are kind of almost the same thing, really. You might have been preparing for a book without even knowing it, in a way. Do you think that it's a happy accident, or do you think it was completely a realized vision that they had when they were creating it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, when Robert wrote Sleepaway Camp, he wrote the beginning of the movie and he wrote the end of it, and then he filled in the whole rest of the movie with just experiences that he had in his own life at going to that same exact camp when he was a kid. And he took the different experiences with different people, and he made characters out of some of those people and also other people that he had known in his life. And yeah, I mean, I think he pretty much had it mapped out, because he was like 11, 12, 13 years old going to that camp as a kid, and
Right.
he probably that whole time was developing this story in his head. And then in his early 20s he starts putting it down on paper and putting together a story. And he even says how he he designed it with the idea of the camp that he went to in his mind when he wrote it.
Right.
And it makes sense because that's how he sees camp. And so it was actually really cool that he was able to film it at the same camp he went to as a kid, because then it just it made it even more close to him.
Yeah, and there's so many elements that add to the reality of it, I feel. And one of them certainly is the humor, because sometimes the humor is the hardest part to get into a horror film without it going too campy or too silly or people laughing at it. Whereas I feel the humor of that's in Sleepaway Camp is really well judged, because it feels like the sort of things that people would really say. So it's kind of grounded in reality. But there are some quite comical, even some of the kills are quite comical, but like some of the interactions, the way the kids interact with each other, certainly. I think that's quite unique about it as well. Is the humor? It's just the right side of campy, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's so cool that Robert went to camp and that he was able to use like so many of those experiences and put those into the movie, and the interactions with the kids and just the language. I mean, I remember when we were doing Return to Sleepaway Camp, and some people were saying, wow, these kids, they're like really swearing like crazy. Kids aren't like that. Kids don't talk like that. And me and Robert were looking at everybody like, what? Like, this is definitely the way kids that are running rampant at camp, this is exactly how they would be talking.
Yeah,
So,
if people are completely blind to the idea that children behave differently when adults are not watching or when their parents aren't around, then
yeah.
they're deluded, aren't they, really?
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, I mean, if you had gone to camp as a kid, you definitely know that happens. But not even camp. Just think of any other situation where, group of kids get together and there's no adults around. They're going to just talk the way they want and act the way they want. And
Exactly. There's reality shows where they put like a group of young children in a house together, and then just kind of saw how the different groups were, kind of almost like Lord of the Flies kind of approach.
yeah.
And it reminded me, I can't remember what it was called, but it was like a social experiment, and it reminded me a little bit of Sleepaway Camp, because I was like, yep, that's exactly how it is. Some of that is quite funny. It does come across quite funny, because it's the juxtaposition of like a supposedly like cute kid coming out with this absolute filth.
Yeah. You fucking bastard, you're gonna pay for this.
I mean, yeah, like you've got little Jonathan Tiersten there. He's like tiny, and he's just effing and blinding at this 50, 60-year-old guy,
Yeah, definitely.
Which is what kids want to do, to be honest. So in terms of when you were sitting down and planning out the book, how much, because I know there's some critical reviews in there, modern, and I think it's really important that you've kind of looked at some of the modern takes on it and some of the ones because that's massively different, isn't it? The reviews the reviews from the time and the reviews for now, the critical reappraisal, I suppose, is massively different, even in terms of like social, how things have changed socially and what we talk about and what we don't talk about, I guess. But
Yeah.
just the reviews themselves, from just like, this is trash, forget about it, one line review, to
Yep.
people writing massive articles on it. How did you want to approach that in the book? Because I think that's quite tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted, even though it puts a little bit of a negative slant on certain things, I wanted the fans to know that when this movie came out, it was being ripped to shreds by, I think if there was like 20 reviews, 19 of those reviews were bad. And
Right.
the 20th one was half bad. And I think it was important for people to see that, when this first came out, it was just, this is throwaway slasher trash. It's a copycat of Friday the 13th. And, nobody really looked at it for what it was. They just quickly wanted to dismiss it and move on. But that over the years wasn't going to happen with video cassette and, HBO, cable casts and all that. People were going to finally be able to see the movie and judge it for themselves. And especially anybody who didn't watch it at the time because they had heard negative things about it were probably really shocked when they saw the movie and were like, wow, this is actually a very entertaining, crazy movie with one of the best endings I've ever seen in my life.
Well, that's it. And I'm a big advocate for people being able to catch things on Tubi. I've got a friend over in the US, in New York, and we were doing a live stream of Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3 together, and we were both watching it on Tubi at the same time. And I was like, this is kind of the equivalent of searching it out on cable, or there's kind of digging out these movies, so people can still get hold of them, because it is quite a tricky, in a certain way, it is quite a tricky movie to get hold. It certainly is over here, quite a tricky movie to get hold of.
Now, I know it's funny, but I actually, this must have been around 2002 when the box set came out. Mm-hmm. I was involved a little bit with helping get the uncut version sent to the UK, so that when that movie was released over there, it was the uncut version, because the previous version that had been released by Anchor Bay actually had a few spots that had been clipped here and there.
Ah, okay.
So yeah, Anchor Bay UK contacted me and they were like, we'd really like to put up the uncut version. Is there any way you know of that we can do this? And I was like, well, it just so happens that my friend Robert Hiltzik has an uncut 35 millimeter print. And so we arranged for that to get sent out and to get, telecinied and
I think I've got the white box one. I need to dig it out, because the last couple of times I've got the white box. I don't think it's the one that got recalled. I think it is a region 1. I just can't remember what I've done with it, but I know I have it.
It probably was the one that got recalled. After they put out another version after they pulled all those ones off the shelf, and it just kind of had like a generic box, and the cross was gone from it. I wonder if that's what it is that you have.
It might well be. It might well be. And I think another thing that you do in the book that is quite tricky is because it is Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3. You cover them in detail, and you don't sort of dismiss them, or kind of, you give them the weight that they deserve, because for a lot of people, they absolutely love those films. They see them, and I think the way that you explain, almost like the way you enjoy them, I think is very similar to the way I enjoy them, which is I don't necessarily link them to the first one. I just look at them as really fun. Certainly the second one, really fun, a really fun film. I don't necessarily compare the first one and the second one and go, oh, I like this, but I don't like that. I like both of them, but in very, very different ways. Was that quite tricky? Because obviously there's probably some people who are diehard Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3 fans and maybe don't like the first one as much.
Yeah, no. For me, it was important to come out and let everybody know that I'm a giant fan of the sequels, because it seems like over the years, for some reason, because I've had more involvement with, dealing with people from the first Sleepaway Camp and a lot of the conventions and reunions and screenings and everything I set up, it all had to do with the first movie. And so people just kind of assumed, oh, he doesn't really like the sequels so much. But that's actually not true. I'm actually a big fan of the sequels, especially the second one. And I have a blast with them. And yeah, so I wanted to let people know that, the sequels are really cool, and if you like the first one, the sequels are in a different tone, but they're still fun slasher movies with some great gore and great characters, and a lot of the stuff that you like about Sleepaway Camp, the character interactions and the bitches and the good girls and whatnot, like it's still in there, but it's just the vibe is done in a different way.
Oh, definitely. And I think, it's not like people have to say, oh, Pamela Springsteen, I wasn't a fan. Like, she's brilliant in those films.
Absolutely.
Like, she's so good. It's a shame. Or maybe it's not, because maybe it adds to the mystique a little bit more. That you don't hear a lot or any of her talking about the movies, or I certainly haven't.
Yeah.
But actually, maybe that's what is pretty cool, because the movies just kind of speak for themselves.
They do. And I mean, without question, I get more requests for a Pam Springsteen interview than anybody else in the Sleepaway Camp world right now. It's like
that's so cool. That's so funny as
everybody
well.
wants to hear from her. And
the Sleepaway Camp fans are more interested in hearing from Pamela Springsteen than they are from hearing from Bruce Springsteen.
That's true. Very true.
That's just so funny, because so in that small subset of people, she's the boss. Like she's the
oh, absolutely. So, if she came out and decided to do an appearance, like at a screening or something like that, I think it would sell out in seconds, and people would just flock to it, because everybody wants to hear from her about what it was like for her making these movies.
Yeah, definitely. And you've definitely had a big part to play in getting people out and realizing that they are interesting to other people. Like, maybe they didn't even know that if they went to a convention, and obviously conventions have blown up, but when you were telling them about them, it was kind of like, oh, by the way, from what I read in the book, it seemed like you were going, by the way, there are hundreds of people who would pay for pictures and getting things signed by you, and it seemed like it was quite hard to convince some of the actors that was actually true.
Yeah, I mean, because in their mind, Sleepaway Camp came and went, and nobody was talking about it, nobody cared about it. So when I put together that first reunion in New York City for it was April 2001, and a lot of the people that I brought in were like really like, okay, we'll go, but we're not really expecting much. Especially Robert. He was probably the hardest one to convince. But I'm like, I says, I'm the one who hears from all the fans on the website. And I says, I've gotten hundreds and hundreds of emails from fans that are going to go to this event. And so he was like, all right, I'll take your word for it. And sure enough, it was pandemonium. The fans were all over the place. And, seeing was believing. Everybody who couldn't possibly believe that this movie had grown on to be what it became, they finally got to see it with their own eyes at just this first convention. And then everybody's like, oh, wow. Like, okay, yeah, we'll do another one.
Yeah, because I mean, it's quite a nice, kind of sweet moment, I think, in the book where you talk about that, like almost convincing people that they've got an audience, they've got fans. Like, maybe now that there's such a demand for people to do horror movies at conventions, that pretty much like stunt actors and makeup artists and actors, everybody, I'll go out to the UK and I'll do a convention, or I'll go over to Canada or to the US. Whereas I think then it was almost more niche, wasn't it? And unless you were in a small group of people who went to all of them, you didn't realize how popular your film was. So which actors do you think were the most instrumental in helping you take those relationships on further and build the book? Like, so who do you think was the most inspiring group of people that really helped you build the book?
Well, by the time the book came around and I started working on the book, I would say, Robert Hiltzik, definitely, Missy, and more a lot of like the people who work behind the scenes, like I actually tracked down Bill Billowit, who was the production designer, and nobody had talked to him in years about Sleepaway Camp. So he talks really for the first time about it in this book, and he just gave me so much great information about what it was like, creating because he did a lot of work on creating the effects, because he basically designed them. And then, he worked with Ed French, who was the makeup effects guy, and between the two of them, they really came up with the effect. And then Ed Fountain, who was the mechanical effects guy, he was also very instrumental in some of those effects, like the arrow through the neck.
Yeah,
and it was cool, like finally being able to talk to these guys about a lot of the stuff that nobody really knew how exactly it happened. And these were the only people that could tell it. And
so fascinating, isn't it? It's so fascinating.
It really is.
From the person who did that particular moment that you remember, they were there either under the bed pushing something up or squirting squirting blood or what. It's really cool. Funny you're saying that. I was just watching some behind the scenes from a police academy and watching one of the stuntmen, and it was like a big muscly guy, and he had to kind of put on an afro wig, dress up, and look like Hooks, the little and it showed him changing his body language and the way he was moving just for that 3 seconds of him flying through the air, and to get the landing. They were like, and he even landed like her, like she would have landed. And I was just thinking, that's the sort of person I really want to hear from, because we often do hear the same stories from the actors because they've got that experience, but they've maybe been interviewed a few times now, and it's like,
and that's something else. That's another thing that I had heard. It's like, certain people we've heard from hundreds and hundreds of times. We've heard their story a million times. What can you do with the Sleepaway Camp book now that is going to give us something different? And it's like, well, I'm going to give you the stuff that you haven't heard, and I'm going to make that kind of the focus of the book. And of course, all the important stuff that that the actors and the crew went through, but also now you're going to really get to hear from these behind the scenes people who made Sleepaway Camp what it was.
And you definitely balance that, I know, with the photographs as well. So like the photographs within the book, it's not just your kind of standard like press photos. There's some really cool like group shots of different people wearing things that they wore at the time, and obviously there's the special effects pictures. It's a real diary, but like not just of the people that immediately come to mind when you think of the film. Obviously we know film is a collaborative process, but it's really nice to see that there was lots of people there who maybe I don't know what they look like, but they've got smiles on their faces. They're enjoying making it. It felt like a real sort of almost like a summer camp experience making the film.
Yeah, and it's true, because in a lot of the books, a lot of them are making of books, and they tend to focus on the actors, and the actors talk about what it was like doing their thing. But a lot of times, not the effects people, but some of the other people, like the production designers and the mechanical people, they're just as important to these effects being, done properly. And, you don't usually hear so much from them. But yeah, so that's, I definitely wanted to do that with this, and give people like the kind of like the deepest dive into the making of this movie as you're ever going to get, because you're hearing.
Well, I feel you were successful. Yeah, you were definitely successful in doing that.
Thank you.
I honestly, I got it on Christmas, and I think I find it really hard these days to get through books, and unless it really grips me. I read a good book, and then when you've read it in a day or two, you think, oh man, like I should have savored it. Obviously, I mentioned the photos then, and the kind of the criticism. It's hard to balance all of those things without it being, a 500-page book with a lot of kind of fat. And there is no fat. It's like it's a good chunky book full of everything that you would want to know. What was the editing process like? Was there a lot of things that you thought, well, these are really good, but it might just be things only you want to know?
I really worked close with the editor. Well, one of the main editors of it was Matt, who runs 1984 Publishing, and he and I went back and forth with a lot of stuff because I might have had maybe 10 or 20,000 more words in the book. And, when it gets edited, you lose some of this stuff and you're kind of like, well, I really like this part, but, there's always a reason why, maybe this doesn't really fit so well.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
if something was going to get edited, then we'd go back and say, well, okay, what's the important part of this that you really want to get across? And I would figure out what that was. And I would rewrite that part of it. And then, then that would go in there. So, it happens with every author and every book. That's just the way it works. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely stuff that, you lose a little bit in editing, but
it's tricky, isn't it? It's tricky, I find, because I find it really easy editing other people's things more than editing my own. I tend to go with all my writing is volume and to take a step back. The proof of the pudding is like kind of how people have received it, and the reviews are amazing. But how about the people who are in the book, like the people that you're telling their story, and it's your story too, the active side of getting the other the behind the scenes things filmed and the and working on the later edition of the film and these things. But the actual people who made those original films, how did they feel when they had that book in their hand? Did you hear back from many of them?
Yeah, I heard back from a lot of them. It's interesting because you hear back from some and you don't hear from others. And, for instance, Paul D'Angelo, who plays Ronnie, he's been a good friend of mine for many, many years. And, he got the book and he called me up the next day and he says, I was up all night and I read the whole book. He's like, this is awesome. You did such an amazing job. I love this. And I was like, oh, thank you. Because, it was important to me that I got the stuff that he told me across very well. And I know the fans liked that, I know I put a picture of when he was in a music group at one point in time and people were like, wow. And, of course we sent Robert and Missy out books and Missy sent out a beautiful message about how she loved it. It was just so cool as one of the makers of, the movie to hear that. And her brother, who also was in the movie, he played one of Artie the chef's assistant cooks. And he's in the book. He told me some very interesting stories because he also worked as a production assistant. And he got the book and, read right through it and loved it. Frank Saladino, who played Gino, Larice, who played Billy. These guys, they had a blast with the book. And it was really cool because Larice, who played Billy, who gets killed by the bees, and Frank, who plays Gino, who is Ricky's counselor, the two of them actually, because of the book, they haven't seen each other in 40 years. They decided that they would get together and hang out and meet up because of the book. And so they met up at a pub and, they had an awesome time. And, it's an amazing thing to know that, you were like the catalyst for making these things happen.
It is really cool to hear that people have been connecting as well and reconnecting, because it was a bit of detective work for you, really, wasn't it? Putting all the pieces together early on.
Oh yeah, right from the beginning, it was a big puzzle because nobody knew where anybody was or what anybody was doing. So it was all about, finding that first piece of the puzzle and then, starting to connect and go from there. And, that's what happened when I for months couldn't find anybody. And then I finally found Jonathan Tiersten. And just in a amazing cosmic coincidence, I guess, he was in a band that was they were doing a show out in Massachusetts where I live. And he was living in Colorado at the time. So the fact that he was coming to Massachusetts to do a show was pretty amazing. And I was like, hey, do you mind if I come to the show? Will you do an interview? We're starting this website and we want to start spreading the word about Sleepaway Camp. And he was like, yeah, I'll do it. And so I went out there, met him, and through talking to him, I found out some information that led me to the next step, which was finding Felissa Rose. And then, it kept snowballing. I'd find one person, then I'd find another, and then another. And like, as you read in the book, you can see how it starts with that one puzzle piece and then works its way all the way through.
Yeah, it's amazing that you've got so many people like you say, that probably 99% of the people who worked on that film. And then what I think was quite touching as well is obviously I didn't know much about Desiree Gould as an actress or a person, but the chapter that you wrote about her, the tribute chapter, was really interesting and kind of understood her a bit more of the character, because it is such a strange character and it's such a choice of how she plays that character. And I feel I got a real understanding of it from that chapter. So it must have been great to connect with her.
Oh, absolutely. And I brought her to, she had done a couple conventions. She went to the original one that I set up in 2001. And then I also brought her to another one in 2009. And it was cool. We just got to spend the whole weekend, doing, meeting with all the fans and all that. But, then, we'd go out to eat, for dinner, and, we'd hang out at the hotel, and just, it was so cool to, to know her as a person. And, because a lot of people say that they say she's a lot like Aunt Martha. And she definitely does have some attributes that were like Aunt Martha. But, she's just a very fun, bubbly, vivacious person. And wow, I got to tell you, when I found out that she passed, I couldn't believe it. It was just of all the cast to hear that, that they passed. She was the big surprise.
I bet, because obviously that comes across in the book. It comes across, and it's a lovely tribute to her, but obviously like an unexpected one, that you would have to kind of frame it that way. I suppose one of the benefits of writing the book was allowing people to realize how special they were to other people, like actually saying something that maybe they dismissed or didn't realize. And I got that about with her when you talk about some of the experiences with her, which was that she didn't realize how much people loved that character.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, when we went and did the first reunion in 2001, and each person was called out on the stage individually, there's no doubt in my mind that when they called Desiree Gould Aunt Martha, the crowd went wild. I mean, she got the loudest applause of anybody. And wow. It's funny, she only has, she's going to roll at the beginning and she's going to roll at the end. But, she isn't really one of the main characters throughout the movie. Yet she was one of the favorites just because of that iconic performance that she puts together for that movie.
She left it all on the stage, so to speak. And I guess part of a critical reappraisal is that people are not, I was going to say like memeing, but not really memeing, but like kind of isolating certain moments and characters and remembering those and say, oh, do you remember this particular bit? And even though the character has got some strange ideas, you kind of smile, which is a really strange juxtaposition, because in another actor's hands, she could be the kind of evil stepmother, very one note.
Well, what I think is interesting as well is over the years, the fans have told me that Aunt Martha, they say, is the real villain of Sleepaway Camp. Because if it wasn't for what she did, Angela probably wouldn't have had this, psychotic break or whatever you want to call it. And so, Aunt Martha really is responsible for that.
So yeah, because I mean, that leads in quite nicely to one of the later chapters. In fact, I think it's one of the last, talks about gender and homoeroticism and how it's received. The film was received by different groups. You could quite easily leave that out because it's a sensitive issue, but it was approached sensitively. The fan base of a film, it chooses itself, doesn't it? So and how people read it as well. Is that the same experience when you were meeting people in like conventions and Q&As? Were you surprised at the range of different people who were into the film?
Yeah, no, yeah, you met fans from, from all walks of life. That's for sure. And something that got associated with Sleepaway Camp over the years was that they consider parts of it to be a transgender movie, and it really is not, because Angela wasn't a character that that had some sort of a sex transition surgery, or even wanted to be the opposite sex. It was the fact that she had been abused by her crazy aunt that made all these things happen. So I think people sometimes confuse that the first movie is transgender in some ways, because the second movie starts with them automatically saying right off the bat, Angela has had a sex change, and
Right.
she became like a transgender killer, I guess, somewhat in the second movie. But yeah, I mean, yeah. So you have fans from definitely all walks of life, and everybody loves the movie in their own way, and everybody respects one another's opinions about it, and yeah, I wanted to keep all that stuff straight and to the point, and and handle it properly and sensitively.
Yeah.
You felt that way. I'm glad to hear it.
No, well, no, I think so too. It's concise and clear, and also you can't necessarily no one, like, I can write something and I can't dictate how someone translates that when they read it, whatever they're going through that day or in their life. They find something different in it. I always think The Exorcist is a good example of that. There's so many readings because you can watch it from Reagan's point of view, you can watch it from Chris's point of view, but the first time I really got a deep understanding of the film and a deep love for the film was through Father Karras's point of view, because from I've got a relatively religious background, had some of those similar feelings as him. Some of the things that he had to do and the choices he had to make, I identified with them. So therefore, I got more out of the film. And I guess that's kind of what you talk about in the chapter about how people receive it. I guess the second film does muddy the waters, doesn't it? Because it's a completely different group of people with their completely different idea on what the first film was about and what they want to do in the second one.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, I love the sequels.
Me too.
What happens though is that it moves from being more of a dark and moody movie into more of like a fun and funny movie.
Yes.
And again, you can have just as much fun with either or, and
yeah, there's space for all of those things, and I think that yeah, they're actually quite nice companion pieces, the first and the second one. But thanks so much, Jeff. Is there anything that you anywhere that you want to point people towards, whether it's a film, a website, a book, something that you want to share before we go?
Yeah, I would just say keep your eyes peeled, because that book was just the beginning. There's more coming, and yes, there's more Sleepaway Camp stuff coming, and I think the fans are going to be really excited at what's coming next.